Alright, let's get started on my Guglielm Special here. Hopefully this won't be too bad. It's not like he recorded that many Lostwave songs. Oh, gosh. There are 78 of these? Yes, indeed. 78 Lostwave songs recorded by a German music aficionado that goes by the name Guglielm on What's That Song. A DJ himself, Guglielm recorded music off of WFMU, a New Jersey, New York radio station in the early 80s and early 90s. He also recorded off of several other radio stations, mainly off of WFMU. And before I get started, 3 quick notes. This is going to be my longest video by far, and while I'd love for you to sit and watch the whole thing, seriously, I could really use the watch hours, you can use the video chapters to jump to the Lostwave songs you really care about. Speaking of which, I am calling all these by their placeholder names in the chapters and going alphabetically. It just makes things easier for me. Oh, and I'm going off of the Lostwave SMISC spreadsheet, link in the description, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later in the video. Now, back to what is going to be inevitably an incredibly bad idea. And we start with the song Talking Heads-like Song, which is only at the beginning alphabetically thanks to its quotation marks. The song got its incredibly descriptive name because, well, it sounded like David Byrne of the Talking Heads. And this one was solved on What's That Song by Medusa65. No further information is available. And quickly, we find ourselves with our first still unsolved Guglielm song. For those curious, 15 fully unsolved songs remain. This one is called 102-20, though it's also known as Guglielm's Industrial Instrumental. And perhaps because it's an instrumental, it remains unsolved. On to the next song, which teaches us something important to keep in mind about Guglielm. He wrote down band and song names that he heard when he could, and in some cases they'd be very wrong. In other cases, they'd actually be incredibly helpful. In this case, he'd written down the name Accent on Travel, spelled the way, well, that you'd expect for it to be spelled, which he had trouble finding due to a travel agency with the same name. Well, What's That Song user Medusa65 would contribute towards the solve when pointing out the band in question was Accent on Travel with 2 V's. More than 2 years later, the song would be solved. Static by Accent on Travel. And now we have our first FMM server solve with marktrail looking for the song All the Way Down on Discogs and considering alternate spellings or similar phrases coming across On the Way Down, and there it was. All the Way Down was On the Way Down by Heavy Manners. Moving on to our first Dark Goldenrod song. What's that mean? Well, the Lostwave solve tracking spreadsheet I mentioned, Lostwave SMISC color codes. Dark Goldenrod in this case means the song itself is solved, but that no high-quality copy of the solved song is available. The song in question in this case is All the Words Are Still There, which has a somewhat convoluted backstory. Sweeor found an instrumental version back in November 2022, and in February 2023, Kurty would provide additional context. I'm going to try to keep it short. Basically, the solve of this song was The Words Are Still There by Price Group. And Price Group was, quoting Discogs, a short-lived duo consisting of R. Stevie Moore and Jim Price. Jim Price was a WFMU DJ, and WFMU, as I mentioned, is the radio station that Guglielm recorded most of his Lostwave songs from. They released that instrumental version on a tape called Amateur Hour, and that led to an archived version of R. Stevie Moore's website, which indicated Price Group at one point released this song via a tape compilation, which is not available anywhere. Thus, Dark Goldenrod. With that, we move on to yet another unsolved song, Aspiration, which marktrail accurately describes as an outsiderish garage track, and points out that Guglielm had tagged the artist as Godhead, while throwing some shade towards Guglielm's accuracy with artist tags. He also brought up asking Erwin Chusett, a WFMU DJ that played a ton of outsider music, including one of the most infamous Lostwave tracks, Curly Toes. Anyway, Erwin sadly wouldn't recognize Aspiration. Hey, look, we're in the B's now, at Bois Seul, a German track that Guglielm didn't record off of WFMU, but instead from a German radio station. After a while, What's That Song user MusicFan1994 suggested a band called Die Rutler that only had one release and sounded similar in terms of their style and pronunciation of various words. It turns out that Die Rutler would go on to rename themselves In and Out, one word, or IAO for short. TYX would reach out to a member of IAO who would confirm this was Bois Seul by Die Rutler. We'd also get an HQ upload later to close this one out completely. Now we get our second Dark Goldenrod song, and arguably a more notable one, Bombs in the Tundra, tagged as Opus by Pleasure Hounds. This took a big step when a now deleted Discord user contacted the DJ that played this song, who couldn't find the CD but was certain this was in fact by Pleasure Hounds. Then things seemed to come crashing down when Kurty got access to a Pleasure Hounds tape and listened to Opus and found it wasn't the song we were looking for. But things changed again when user aidnic found an old playlist from WFMU DJ Pat Duncan, and this playlist is going to end up becoming important for multiple solves down the line. Anyhow, Rocket Boy pointed out that on this list was Bombs in the Tundra by Pleasure Hounds, and that was enough for a solve, despite the track, likely from a Pleasure Hounds demo cassette, being seemingly impossible to get a hold of. Come with me now as we venture into the C's. The letter C, that is. We start with the song known as Call His Name, also called At This Place Again. SKT-SKS suggested a song called Call His Name by Des Perez. Unfortunately, that lead would eventually be ruled out, eliminating the best lead we had. Then, a few weeks later, the song was solved. Mike Wurst, aka Rojo Kato, found it on a playlist from the same time as another solved Guglielm song. Also, I'll note this is a case where Guglielm had the tag very wrong, as he'd written Climatic Nouveau by Ceramic Hello, and the song was Pink and Green by Nihil Mali. Next up we have a song called Colorblind, which Guglielm had tagged as Paisley Gray with an E. Well, What's That Song user enjoyslurm found a band with that exact name but with the A spelling of Gray. And there it was. Colorblind by the Paisley Gray. And that is quickly followed by yet another What's That Song solve. While Guglielm didn't have a title for this one, he did have a tag, Corvairs. And What's That Song user Hasman2014 was able to reach out to a DJ collector and confirm. This was Juarez by the Corvairs. On we go to the D's, and sadly, one I can't find much information about. The What's That Song post is a bit of a ball of string, which leads to a post marked as spam or a post redirecting to another one. Long story short, I can't say how this one was solved, but apparently Guglielm himself solved it. Do You Believe in Angels was Love Music by Tomek Lamprecht. The next song falls victim to Guglielm's sometimes unreliable tagging. Guglielm had written the song down as Don't Go in the Street and the artist down as Modern Clocks. Well, given Guglielm's reliability, Discord user Creaking suggested Modern Clicks, though originally throwing them aside as being too reggae. They still wanted to hear this album to rule it out completely. Cut to several months later when Creaking was able to download the album off music sharing website Soulseek, and there it was. Don't Go in the Street was Home in the Rain by Modern Clicks, which coincidentally sounded different from the vast majority of their other music. Next solve I also don't have a lot of solve information on, outside the fact that it was solved by Suior on the FMM Discord. Down on the bottom was Down on the File by Dangerous Girls. And as we enter the E's, we have another unsolved Guglielm song, Every Day is Work Work. And I really enjoy this one in full disclosure. It's funky and fun. We did rule out some leads and decent possibilities, such as Work Work by PJ and the T's. Sorry, I have to call them that because I'm YouTube. Also, the most interesting lead that came out of this, Guglielm had labeled the band as Progressive Aid, and while we thought that band existed for a period of time, it later turned out that they probably didn't exist. Probably. You see, a very similarly sounding band called Regressive Aid existed, and they got WFMU airtime around the time that this was recorded. So in all likelihood, this is a mistag. And now we have another solve with little solve info, though this one from What's That Song. In this case, What That Song user NanaDensin identified the song known as Forget This World as Forget Just Once by Now. On to our first Fuchsia song. Fuchsia being the color code for partially solved or likely solved, but needing additional information. And this had very recent progress. The song in this case, Guglielm had labeled as Freaky by Satyr. That's with an O. Things really shifted into high gear when marktrail pointed out an artist, again from WFMU from the right time period, that sounded very similar, an artist named Satyr with a Y. And it turns out this artist was a one-man project and is seemingly impossible or next to impossible to find or get a hold of. But user Skyat was able to get a hold of some people who knew him and his work, and while this is still unofficial, they seem confident this was in fact Satyr, though there may also be a session vocalist on this track. I wouldn't be surprised to see this one move to Solved relatively soon. Up next, we have a song that Guglielm had tagged as Girls Cry by Daybreak Conspiracy. Well, Sweeter found out it was likely Gulls Cry, not Girls Cry, and found it associated with a band called the Dave Rave Conspiracy. Though sadly, no copies of their music would be available online, so it sit needing verification for years, until user Erin was able to purchase a copy, which led to a solve. We move on to another unsolved Guglielm song, the absolutely weird I Am a Star. Seriously, this experimental track samples a 1977 episode of Doctor Who. In fact, the song is often called bad, unfinest, and is cited as having the potential to be one of the last Guglielm solves. I can't say anymore. You just have to listen to it yourself. Link in the description. Moving on, the song I Believe in You Baby was solved by What's That Song user Archivist19. Sadly, he didn't provide any explanation, nor did anyone ask, so yeah, this was still solved as I Believe in You by Billy Anderson. And another song with little explanation towards the solve, this time from FMM, where marktrail solved the song I Confess My Crime as I Never Thought by Droogies. The pattern continues with this song Guglielm had tagged as I Hear the Vibrations by Wooden Ships. However, What's That Song user AxelBR found that band and song on YouTube, ruling them out. Eventually, the song was solved by Sweeter on the FMM server, and though I don't have any additional details on that, the song was solved as Dial M for Monkey by the Terminal Waistband. And again, another solve with not a lot of information about it. In this case, I Need Your Love was solved by marktrail on Discord as Forever by The Flakes. Next, we have another Dark Goldenrod song, which means it's not quite there yet. In this case, a song Guglielm had tagged as I See Ghosts by Network. And after a lot of uncertainty, it became clear this band, Network, probably did exist, as they did seem to get airtime on WFMU, but they didn't seem to exist anywhere outside of the radio. Discord user Rocket would also find a YouTube comment which led to additional connection to WFMU, specifically DJ Pat Duncan. And like I mentioned, Pat and his playlist will end up contributing to solves of multiple Guglielm songs, but this one still remains in verification. Though we did get an image of the band and 2 confirmations that I See Ghosts was them, we still don't have any actual evidence, so in verification this one currently stays. Now we move on to the most recent Guglielm solve, and a big one. Big enough in fact that it's going to get its own solve video, but it's worth mentioning here for a number of reasons. The song in question being I Was a Fool in Love. I will say, honestly, this is one of my favorite Guglielm songs. In fact, I had bought an album in order to rule it out as a lead. Now, I am going to skip most of the search for this song and save it for that full-length video, but here's the solve details. This all connects to a concert venue in New Jersey, where WFMU is located, that you'll hear a few times during the course of this video. The discovery of this venue, unless I'm mistaken, happened during the search of Waiting for the Countdown. Anyway, long story short, it turns out that quite a few bands Guglielm recorded played at the Dirt Club. And going through Dirt Club bands, Rocket found a band called Wind at Night, which sounded very similar to I Was a Fool in Love. And it wasn't too long after that when Basktery heard from one of the members of Wind at Night, Jerry Eckhoff, who confirmed that I Was a Fool in Love was Fool in Love by Wind at Night. We just need a little bit more to confirm. Or, well, maybe not. There was, to put it lightly, a ton of drama because of this being a verification needed and because of, shall I say, some bad actors within the community. See, we'd thought that Tony Farinas, a member of Wind at Night, had passed away, and that we were in contact with his widow, who seemed very confused. This got worse as she literally got spammed by multiple people emailing her dead husband's email all at once. Well, it turned out it wasn't even the right email. Tony Farinas was alive, and I'm going to spiel a bit here, so if you want to skip me being an angry parent, go ahead and jump to the next song in the timeline. Seriously, this whole experience has been very disappointing. It happened with Caroline Herring in The Search for White Lanterns too, and it's frustrating because Lostwave should be about the sharing of new information and joint discoveries. It's one of the things that made me fall in love with this community, but inundating a lead, legitimate or not, ends up doing a disservice to the entire community. And unfortunately, no amount of no contact rules could ever truly solve this problem, as even if no one on the FMM server contacted the same person more than once, people off the server will. So we're put into a catch-22 situation where the best solution is often to keep a lead private, even so far as keeping it to ourselves. I don't know if there's really solutions to this either. It's just incredibly frustrating. Alright, rant over. Anyway, the mod team decided we had enough evidence to call this one solved. Moving on, marktrail solved the song I'm the Devil after checking out the band Public Disturbance, who were from New Jersey, local to WFMU, and that's where he found the solve. I'm the Devil was I Am the Devil by Public Disturbance. Now we get our first Reddit solve, where the song known as In the Sunshine was posted to the shoegaze subreddit and was identified by a now deleted user named A Horde of Rand. In the Sunshine was Complacency by Roller Skate Skinny. We move on to another identified but no high quality audio song, which Guglielm had tagged as In My Hands by Glistening. marktrail tried to get a hold of the record label to no avail and somewhat doubted it was them. Anyway, over time we still attempted to contact anyone close to the band any way we could and eventually confirmed this was in fact In My Head by Glistening. Now, let's move on to the horror section of this video. You see, it was a dark and stormy night. Is the title of this song. It's a weird one. I'm not even sure what genre this would be, and multiple members of the FMM Discord would also seem to be not entirely sure. Otherwise, the song likely has vinyl cracks. That's about it. This one remains quite the conundrum. And I get to cheat a bit on this next one because I made a video on it. So yeah, link in the description. Jenny was solved as Jenny by Los Oits. Okay, now it's time to talk about Joe. Not Defy Joe, but Joe Will Never Be the Same, which Guglielm had tagged as being by David Barron. Bot7KYN on What's That Song found an artist with that name that fit the bill, but it stood stagnant for a while until the artist himself confirmed this song was his. Joe Will Never Be the Same was Joe Cauliflower by David Barron. And has anyone ever told you that you've got Yugoslavian hands? No, of course not. That would be stupid. Just forget I ever brought it up. The point I'm trying to make is this next song, Jugoslavian Alt Rock, spelled with a J, was solved by What's That Song user PSville as Fast Slash by TT Rooter. Though, that's about as much as I know about this solve. And that brings us to another unsolved Guglielm song, Just Doesn't Fit. Kurty would say that it reminded him of Price Group, who were the artists behind The Words Are Still There. In fact, R. Stevie Moore would often be mentioned as a potential candidate for being responsible for this song. And coming back to the Dirt Club, this is quite possibly one of the songs that played there. But that's just kind of where things stand with this one for the time being. Another song with little solved information and one of the weirdest mistags, and another mistag I have to censor because the song the community calls Just Something to Dance To was tagged as Guglielm as being neutral and commercial by EKG. Somehow this was solved by YouTuber TechnoID, and this was Forever Changing Moods by Bad Traffic. Moving on to another unsolved song, Keep Your Faith, which you'd be hard pressed to think of another title for, given how many times Keep Your Faith is said in this song. Other than that, not a lot is known about this one other than it's likely a demo. So we'll move on to another song with little solve info. Knowledge of a Secret Language was identified by Kurty on the FMM Discord as Western World by Alternative TV. Moving into the L's, we have a solved song that was known as Linton Kwesi Johnson style song because it sounded like, well, Linton Kwesi Johnson. It wasn't just Guglielm who thought so either, and it was solved by What's That Song user Medusa65, who apparently found the song by pure chance. Guns, Bombs, and Hand Grenades by RAPP featuring Archie Poole. Now we move on to another unsolved Guglielm song. In fact, we're going to get two in a row here. This one's a weird one, and spoilers, the next one is too. In this case, this is a bizarre noise or post-rock style track, though at least a few of the FMM members believe it is likely on vinyl, with Egg Moment pointing out this one has audible vinyl cracks on it. Also, Guglielm tagged this one as being by, I kid you not, Thomas Jefferson Slave Apartments, who were, believe it or not, a real band that got WFMU airtime. And it appeared at some point someone got a hold of them and ruled it out, though it wasn't clear who. That's where this one stands, and that moves us to a divisive, weird, quirky track, one that I can't help to admit I like. Depending on who you ask, this is either a good song or, well, not. But if you know me, you know I like quirky songs, so it's not a surprise I am a fan of the song known as Little Music Bags. Now, first off, it's pretty clear that the lyrics of the placeholder title is coming from isn't Little Music Bags, but Little Music Box. And with that, how can I answer the question you're all thinking? What even is this song? Genre-wise, cabaret or dark cabaret seem to be the best fits, though many alternatives have been suggested. And I do agree with this deleted user. It sounds like a song from a cartoon. I also think the beginning of Little Music Bag sounds a little bit like the beginning of the Lostwave song I Know. Also, sorry Severed Head, but our opinions of Little Music Bag are just going to be one thing we'll have to agree to disagree on. I'd also like to note that Little Music Bag is actually one of the highest view count unsolved Lostwave songs on Q's YouTube, more than arguably better Guglielm songs we have yet to get to. With all that out of the way, this song is hard to find, and it may not help that a good portion of people into Lostwave might not want this one to be found. But I do. Leave all your Little Music Bag's thoughts in the comments below. We move on to Love Weeds, which was tagged as Love Weeds by Bois Seul. Originally, no evidence of such a band seemed to exist. However, when marktrail got in touch with an extremely similar sounding artist that also got WFMU airtime, the mystery was solved. This was Love Weeds by Bois Seul. It's just that Bois Seul was just essentially two guys goofing around. Discussion now moves on to the song Me and Michelle, which was tagged as Me and Michelle by Matter Rose, and that band did exist and did get some WFMU airtime. After a bit of nothing happening, a few What's That Song users got in touch with various members of Matter Rose, and that led to a solve. This is Me and Rochelle by Matter Rose. Next up, we have the song Guglielm tagged as Midnight Matinee by Family Fodder. After a fairly dead search, Kurty found the lyrics on Discogs, and it wasn't long after that the song we were looking for was uploaded to YouTube. This was Escape in Ink by the Nebulas. And it turned out that marktrail would have this song in his collection and have just forgotten about it entirely. Also, yes, FatBird, we should take Guglielm's tags with a grain of salt. Then we have a tag that was right, but only in part. What Guglielm had tagged as Misery by the Phantoms would end up being solved by FatBird as Dancin' in the Rain by Rick Slave and the Phantoms, with Kurty speculating it could have just been announced as the Phantoms on WFMU. And we have another unsolved instrumental that sounds like a plot device from a spy movie, MU-29, also known as Guglielm's Minimal Instrumental. Again, instrumentals can be very challenging to solve, so not a lot can be said about the search as a result. A bit of speculations that it might be on Discogs and that it might be a B-side. Basktery found a lead that fit the bill, but it was fairly quickly ruled out, and so that's about where things stand on this one. So now we return to an incredibly recent solve, and one that is a signifier of the recent era in Lostwave. That is the era of Where's That Song. For those unaware, it's a tech tool that scans a metric ton of music on YouTube and other places to find a match for that music, which is exactly what happened with the song known as My Brother, which wound up being Listen by Chisel. And even Severed Head seemed surprised that this song was found on a channel that she contributed to Where's That Song. So now, the next three songs seemingly never got placeholder titles, all being labeled as Mysterious Song, so I'm going through them in no particular order. The first one is a bit odd. The misc sheet I'm going off of seems to indicate that Guglielm himself solved it, as does one of the What's That Song comments where Guglielm himself says he stumbled upon it, before thanking What's That Song user Moreback. So I'm not actually sure who solved it, but I'm hazarding a guess that Guglielm solved it and Moreback just proposed it as the answer. Anyway, this one was Risk by the Gamma Rays. And we move on to another solve from What's That Song user NanaDensin, in this case the song Well Cut by Genghis Khan. No other solve info on this one, so we jump to our last song with no placeholder title, which also happens to be a What's That Song solve with no real solve info. In this case, the song in question was Right to Reply Part 2 by Trusome21. The solve was accidentally accepted as Part 1. This is, in fact, Part 2. I'm going to take a bit of a break here. If you want to skip to the next song, use the timeline. That being said, I'm halfway through the alphabet and I'm more than halfway through the Guglielm songs, so I'm going to take a minute to say this. This is my longest video by far. I've spent well over 40 hours writing, filming, and editing it. And while I usually just casually ask you to like and subscribe, this is a longer video and I want to get a bit blunt here. My subscriber growth is slow, and my comment and view volume are just as, well, let's just say they're not what I'd like them to be. But you can help. Of course, make sure you do like and subscribe, but also please share this with anyone you think might like it. And if you like this video and haven't seen many of my other videos, find a few to watch. I've made videos on dozens of Lostwave songs at this point, so I bet you can find another song that interests you. And seriously, Thank you. Thank you all. Let's continue with On the Run. Again, a song with little solve info, but solved by server OG Sweor, whose name you've heard a few times by now. Thanks to Sweor, we learned that On the Run was Teddy Through the Glass by Movable Feast. Next, we have one of those small world Lostwave solves. While I don't have a lot of details about this one, the details I do have just show how connected different Lostwave songs can be. In this case, the song known as One of a Kind was solved by FMMOG marktrail as One of a Kind by TV Babies. Now, first off, I'll point out that FatBird had ruled them out. A song of theirs on YouTube sounded nothing like One of a Kind. They had a female singer, so FatBird didn't look into this one. A lesson even I have a hard time remembering. Sometimes in the Lostwave world, we can't make assumptions. Anyway, years after this solve, one of the New York 80s Lostwave songs, another well-known Lostwave uploader, was solved by a monster of solving Lostwave songs, Max Many Mix. And guess who this song was by? No other than TV Babies. To top it all off, TV Babies would also be a lead for the still unsolved Lostwave track, Monster of Love. New from Mattel, it's the only G.I. Joe set where Cobra wins. That's right, it's finally time to overthrow G.I. Joe, which was coincidentally the placeholder name for this next song. Guglielm had the artist tag for this one, in this case the tag being System, spelled, well, the way you'd expect it to be spelled, which is going to be relevant because in searching for this song, Rocket found a band called System with a U, and the excitement ramped up after finding a song by System on YouTube, and it sounded very similar to Overthrow GI Joe. It wasn't long after that the solve was confirmed. Overthrow GI Joe was GI Joe is Dead by The System with a U. We'll follow this up with perhaps one of the more fun solve titles, though I couldn't find a lot of info on the solve itself. The song, which had two placeholder names, Playly Loud and Do You Ever, would have a bizarrely unique actual title, which we learned when server OG marktrail would solve this as Stink by American Soul Spiders. Yes, that is an exclamation mark and a question mark. Our next solve comes as a collaboration between What's That Song and the FMM server. Guglielm had this song tagged as Presence, but user Nono Seacrest on What's That Song would say it sounded like the word this placeholder got its title from wasn't presence, but telepresence. Of course, all of Guglielm's songs were recorded at least 30 years ago, which narrowed down options significantly. Bloost Media found a song called Telepresence by Audio AB, as I'm going to have to call them, and it wasn't long after when Kurty confirmed this as a solve. Here's an apt placeholder title for a Lostwave song, Puzzle Pieces. There was a lot of love for this one, which fell into the genre post-punk. There's also a question of the vocalist's accent and whether usage of the cigarette brand Camel narrowed things down at all. In late 2024, Kurty would say that he couldn't wait to learn who was behind Puzzle Pieces, and just over an hour later, Mystic65 would put an end to Kurty's waiting, solving this one as Cover Taylor by Man from Missouri. And we move on to yet another FMM solve by server OG marktrail, and also one with little detail, but at this point you should honestly just be marveling at how many times I've said marktrail in this video. Anyway, in this case the song Rise Above was identified as Rise by Halo. Here now is another Guglielm song solved by, well, Guglielm. Not much information, but do you need it when it's so notable? So I'll cut to the chase. The song Guglielm had tagged as Ryo Kawasaki was Marilyn by Ryo Kawasaki. We'll follow this one up with another What's That Song solve, again with little info, but for whatever reason it is potentially notable that Guglielm seemed very happy with this solve. No What's That Song user Medusa65 identified the song known as Scene in the Crime. It was Rhythm of Life by Uncle Sam. You know what we haven't had for a bit? An unsolved Guglielm song. So here's one. This song has the placeholder name She's a Rainbow. And what can be said about this song? It's enjoyable, but it's never really gotten much attention in FMM polls. And it's about sex. Sex. Oh, and it's one of the most popular unsolved Guglielm songs on Q's YouTube channel. Not that there are many left. And there's a pretty decent chance that this was one of the bands that played at the Dirt Club. The song also may be associated with the Paisley Underground movement, which would mean the song was likely recorded in 83 or 84, and it may be hard to find because there's a good chance it's a demo. One more thing, it apparently uses a keyboard synth known as a Farfisa, so make of that what you will. Moving back to solves, we continue on to yet another What's That Song solve by Medusa65 with not a lot of information about the song, but it does show you how prolific Medusa65 is as a solver. In this case, the song known as Slash Bash Slap Smash was identified as Slam by the outgroup. You know, this is another good time to remind you how I am really regretting the choice to cover every Guglielm song. It's especially appropriate as we find ourselves at yet another unsolved Guglielm song, in this case, Song of Regret. This track, which I think I'm safe as labeling as a Riot Girl style track, has plenty of fans and even more mystery. Early in the search, Kurty found a band that sounded very similar to Song of Regret, and that band got WFMU airtime during one of the periods Guglielm recorded off of WFMU, and the band in question was a female-fronted rock band called God Is My Co-Pilot. Marktrail wasn't entirely convinced, but he wasn't unconvinced either, and as far as I'm aware, they've never been contacted, so there's potentially room for a solve here. Anyway, Kurty would later speculate that it could be a session recording, which would explain this one being so impossible to find. The next song we move on to is a What's That Song solve with some fun interaction. This is the song known as Steal My Skin, which Guglielm had tagged as Citation by Whale. See, What's That Song user Tasso65 would suggest a record by a band called Whale, and a song called Cetacean, which is basically a term for dolphins and whales. And you can hear how similar cetacean and citation can sound, as Tasso85 would point out. Anyway, this would push Guglielm to buy the record, only to realize he no longer had a working record player. But eventually it would be closed as an accurate solve. We move on to another song that's been solved, but no high quality audio exists yet. And yes, that yet is there for a reason. It was fairly commonly believed that this song was called Striptease or Pricktease. In fact, multiple FMM users would agree the title might not be Striptease after all. And there'd be quite a few sound-alike bands, but nothing solid. That is until we got a hold of that Pat Duncan playlist I mentioned back during the search for Bombs in the Tundra. And if you don't remember that or are just jumping around, user aidnic found a handwritten playlist from WFMU DJ Pat Duncan, and on that list was a song called Cryptease by a band called Whorelords. God, this video is going to get demonetized, isn't it? Anyway, this title would be hard to ignore. As marktrail would point out, it also aligned with the lyrics from the song. Unfortunately, seemingly none of the members of Whorelords would reply to us, leaving this song in verification limbo for a bit. We talked to someone who claimed to own the Whorelords tape on Discogs, but the person who got a hold of them is, well, let's just say, not super reliable. But after a bit of discussion among mods, we decided to call this one Unsolved, especially with some rumors that Whorelords would be formally releasing their songs at some point this year. You know what? This whole video is suffocating. Actually, really, this part is suffocating, because that is the placeholder title for this song. And this one was solved thanks to FMM user Kurty utilizing Discogs advanced search. This would also lead to FatBird pointing out that had we searched for the lyrics on Google Images or record collecting website 45cat, would have been easily able to solve this one. Now, While I Was a Fool in Love was the most recent full Guglielm song solve, there's also a more recent one that's a solve, but, well, I just want to explain. The song in this case is a song known as Take Me Down to the Sea. And I'm also going to ask you to remember Joe Will Never Be the Same. If you're jumping around, I recommend going and watching it first. Because you see David Barron, who Guglielm had tagged as Joe Will Never Be the Same as being by, was also tagged as being the artist on this song. And in the same message as him telling us that Joe Will Never Be the Same was called Joe Cauliflower, he confirmed that this was him and that the song was Ocean. But unlike Joe Cauliflower, we didn't have a full version of this song, so it sat in verification. And sat. Meanwhile, Joe Cauliflower was posted on David Barron's YouTube channel, but Ocean sat like a forgotten suitcase at the airport. David did confirm he had the tape containing Ocean, but never uploaded it. And after a number of vocal users kept pointing out that there was less evidence for other songs us mods had called solved, we saw what we had, the tag, the history, and the connection to WFMU, the voice, and it was all enough for us to agree we should just call this one solved. So we did. Now, the office would like to tell you the difference between this picture and this picture. There is no difference. Which is the title of this track, which was solved by FM user Kurty, and which I can't find additional solve info about, so There Is No Difference was Ignorance by Hideout. And that's followed by another FMM OG solve with little info, in this case marktrail solving the song that had been known as There After Me, which I'll point out that Guglielm had tagged as being by the John Spencer Blues Explosion, being the song Vegetable Binge by White Fluff. Alright, I'm very excited to talk about this next one. It is arguably the most popular unsolved Guglielm song, and in my opinion, it's very catchy, and it's big enough to have its own channel on the FM server. The song in question being Thought So at the Time, which many also refer to as Flowers for a Dead Heart. Honestly, this song is big enough to get its own entire full-length video, and if that's something you'd be interested in, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. For now, I'll try to condense this search as much as possible, and early in the search on the FMM server, I tried to contact some WFMU DJs and WFMU experts, including a Redditor who recommended I reach out to a DJ named Scott Williams. I also reached out to Ken Friedman, the general manager of WFMU since 1985. Ken actually replied very quickly, but was sadly unable to ID the song. This was quickly followed by a reply from Scott, who was very nice, but also sadly unable to ID this track. There are a few things that we felt were likely about this track, though you could never take anything in Lostwave for certain. We felt this was most likely a vinyl release, and probably from 1991 to 1993. However, it'd be possible for the song to have been from the late 80s and simply aired in the early 90s. In fact, quite a few FMM members felt this could be the case, including the extremely knowledgeable marktrail, who said if this was a 90s release, it'd be behind the times. One thing there seemed to be some division on was the accent of the vocalist, with a number of FMM users believing the accent to be American, while yours truly believes the accent could be Scottish. Call me crazy, but I hear some similarities to the band Franz Ferdinand, who have a Scottish vocalist. One thing that did seem to be agreed upon was that we were missing the first few seconds of this song. Anyway, believing the song could fall into the style of jangle pop, Sky posted it to several Facebook groups, but sadly that too led nowhere. More recently, we created a spreadsheet from WFMU playlists to try to find this. However, it has more than 4,000 entries, so it might take a while to get through it. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see a solve come a different way before we get through that spreadsheet. We move on to a solve by What's That Song user Wurzlep, who made a long shot suggestion for the song known as 12 Gates to the City by utilizing Discogs and coming across a song called 12 Gates by High Sheriffs of Blue. Though Wurzlep thought it was a long shot, it turned out not only be right, it turned out that it'd be a band that Guglielm knew. Go figure. We move on to a very accurate Guglielm tag, where he had the song known as, conveniently enough, Vitamin B12 track as being by Vitamin B12, and Mike Wurst, aka Rojo Kato, found it, an untitled track on a rare cassette Vitamin B12 put out, making this the only solved Guglielm track without a title. So instead we just call it Untitled Vitamin B12 track number 2. It's finally another solve I can cheat just a bit on because I made a video on this one too. The solve in question being the song formerly known as Waiting for the Countdown, which was solved as being the song At Night by the band Strike. And if you want more information on that solve, you can watch my video about it, link in the description below. Now we move on to an FMMOG solve, but this time with solve info. In this case, Kurty was looking to ID the song What They Want, a hardcore punk song. And so Kurty took to YouTube, knowing that WFMU was based in New Jersey, and searched for New Jersey hardcore. And there it was, Convertible Hearse by Holeshot. Here we are, the absolute best Guglielm solve. Seriously, this solve is amazing. Because it's by me. And honestly, this solve wasn't as amazing as I built it up to be. But knowing how hard some of these have been to solve, and knowing how few are left, I did feel a bit of pride in my own accomplishment on this one. Not a song I was expecting to solve, and a bit of a weird one too. This song, known as Words Between the Lines of Age, was tagged as being by Opposable Thumb, featuring John Schnell and Bob Mozart. So I found the right John Schnell and emailing him, expressing disbelief that no one had thought to do so before. He confirmed this song was called Words Between the Lines of Age, but was attributed only to Bob Mozart as the artist. Unfortunately, the master of this one would be long gone, meaning no high quality audio on this one, but it did at least give us a bit of an amusing anecdote as John wondered how this song ever played on the radio. And after explaining to him that it came off of WFMU, we had our answer. He was the DJ that played it. And we're going to follow this one with another solved Guglielm song without high quality audio available, Your Flame. It'd be tagged as Guglielm as being Siren by Cause Vertical, but Guglielm himself even suspected this was a mistag of the song The Siren by This Mortal Coil. While aidnic would believe this meant the song was likely from the early 80s, Kurty and #1 Honey and Salt fan would both agree the production value would likely place it in the 90s. Late into the search for the song, marktrail would mention a vocalist named Dina Emerson of a band called The Sirens, and, well, knowing Guglielm, it'd be completely possible for this song to have the tag reversed. Aidnic would somewhat joke, imagine if the tag meant something after all. Well, it wasn't long afterwards the song found itself in verification needed, and quickly after that the song was solved. Your Flame was Cause Vertical by The Sirens. It's the last unsolved Guglielm song, You're So Far Away. And I might look just a little bit different for this one. Why? Well, it's definitely not because I forgot to include it the first time around. Definitely not. But anyway, this one hasn't seemed to have gotten much attention. But there are a few things I can tell you about it. Notably, we actually know this song is from 1983. How do we know this? Well, because oddly enough, the song recording included a part of a sports broadcast that we could date to 1983. Also, it's at least possible that this was released on vinyl, though that's up for debate. And it may not surprise you, but it's also possible this was a Dirt Club band. That's about all that can be said about this one. At least, for now. And we end with a final solve by the prolific What's That Song user Medusa65, who solved the song known as Zutu Music to much praise and affection from Guglielm. Zutu Music was Batho Kebao by Taue Lesotho. That's it. I've done it. And speaking from the heart here, despite the massive undertaking, this video is absolutely worth it to make. It's so unique to have so many Lostwave songs recorded by one man and almost entirely from one radio station. And the variety of ways that Guglielm's songs have been solved just goes to show the time and the effort that the entire Lostwave community put into finding these songs. And I also want to take this time to thank everyone who subscribed to my channel. When I started this channel a little bit over a year ago, I did it as a passion project, and hitting 1,000 subs was an aspirational goal I thought I would take years to get to. So seriously, thank you to each and every one of you. Now, what should I do for 10,000 subs? Maybe queue uploads. There's only 991 songs. On second thought, maybe I'll just do Curly Toes. Until next time, I'm PersonOfDistraction, and I'm now listening to
Keep your faith, keep your faith. Can't give up now, it's not too late. Keep your faith, keep your faith. Can't give up now, it's not too late.
Just give me your little music back.
Every day, work drives a man